The sun was just beginning to rise over quiet, tree-lined streets of Willow Creek Estates, a neighborhood known for its manicured lawns, white picket fences, and the ever-watchful eyes of its homeowners association. The distant hum of sprinklers and the scent of freshly cut grass filled the air on this particular morning. At the end of Maple Lane, a stately two-story house stood out, not just for its elegant porch and blooming hydrangeas, but for the property owner sign that had recently appeared in the yard. Marcus Reed was inside, sipping his morning coffee, checking his tablet for emails, and taking the tranquility that came with owning his first investment property. Marcus, a successful real estate entrepreneur in his early 30s, had recently purchased a house as part of a long-term plan to build generational wealth. He was excited to make improvements to the home and the community, and was pleased with his accomplishment, having progressed from humble beginnings. What he didn't know was that his presence had not gone unnoticed by the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian, Karen Whitmore, president of the Willow Creek HOA. Karen, a woman in her late 30s with a reputation for micromanagement and a penchant for rules, had lived in Willow Creek for more than a decade. She prided herself on knowing every resident, every property line, and every bylaw in the HOA handbook. She immediately assumed that Marcus was a new tenant, perhaps even an unauthorized one, when she saw him move in. The idea that someone new could move in without her knowledge was unthinkable to her, because she had not been informed of a sale. That morning, clipboard in hand and determination in her step, Karen marched up the walkway to Marcus's porch, her face set in a mass of authority. She didn't bother to knock. Instead, she called out, "Excuse me, you there. I need to speak with you immediately." Marcus, surprised by the abrupt greeting, set down his coffee and stepped onto the porch. "Good morning. Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but wary. Karen wasted no time. "The HOA's president is Karen Whitmore. I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but you can't just move into this house without proper approval. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we have rules. I'm afraid you'll need to vacate the premises within 30 days. She thrust a paper at him, an eviction notice, hastily printed and bearing the HOA letterhead. Marcus blinked, momentarily stunned. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he replied, trying to keep his composure. "I am not a tenant here. I'm the owner of this property." Karen scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "That's impossible. I know the owner of this house, and you're not him. The Johnsons lived here for years, and they never mentioned selling. I will be forced to escalate this to the board and, if necessary, the authorities if you do not leave." Realizing that this was more than just a case of mistaken identity, Marcus took a deep breath. It was a test of his patience and professionalism. The house deed was pulled out of his briefcase by him, and he gave it to Karen. "Here's the paperwork. I closed on this property last month. Everything is in order." Karen snatched the document, scanning it with a frown. Her eyes darted from the page to Marcus and back again, searching for any sign of fraud. The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to gather on their porches, watching the scene unfold. Some looked embarrassed, others curious, but all were silent as Karen's authority was quietly challenged. Karen returned the deed after a long pause, her face flushed with confusion and outrage. She murmured, "Well, I'll have to verify this with the board." "You're still subject to all HOA rules in the meantime, and I expect you to attend the next meeting." Marcus nodded, his patience intact. "Yes, of course. I am looking forward to getting to know everyone and helping the community." The neighbors began to disperse as Karen stormed off, some of whom smiled sympathetically at Marcus. As he returned to his cup of coffee, he thought about how quickly a quiet morning had become a public spectacle and how crucial it was to maintain his dignity and grace. A palpable sense of tension permeated Willow Creek Estates in the days that followed the altercation on Marcus's porch. Karen, still smarting from the embarrassment of being publicly corrected, wasted no time in calling an emergency meeting of the HOA board. She spent hours poring over property records, convinced that some error or deception must have occurred. She called the county clerk's office, demanded copies of the sale documents, and even questioned the real estate agent who had handled the transaction. However, the conclusion of each inquiry was the same. Marcus Reed was unquestionably the legal owner of the house at the end of Maple Lane. The board, A collection of longtime residents who had grown accustomed to Karen's leadership style listened patiently as she recounted her version of events. Some were sympathetic, others less so, but all agreed that the situation needed to be handled delicately. "We can't afford to alienate new homeowners," said Mr. Patel, the treasurer, his voice calm but firm, "especially someone who's already shown he's willing to engage with the community." Karen bristled at the suggestion that she had overstepped, but she reluctantly agreed to invite Marcus to the next HOA meeting to formally introduce himself. Meanwhile, Marcus went about his business, making small improvements to the property and greeting neighbors with a friendly wave. He didn't let his enthusiasm be dampened by the undercurrent of curiosity or, in some cases, suspicion. He attended a neighborhood barbecue, chatted with families at the park, and even offered to help an elderly neighbor fix a broken fence. Slowly, the walls began to come down, and Marcus found himself welcomed by many who had initially kept their distance. When the night of the HOA meeting arrived, the community center was packed. The residents flocked to the folding chairs, eager to witness the drama's resolution, which had become the neighborhood's talk. Karen, who was seated at the head of the table, gave the usual orderly start to the meeting. She said, echoing throughout the room, "Before we begin tonight's agenda, I would like to address the recent changes on Maple Lane. Mr. Marcus Reed, would you please stand and introduce yourself to the community?" Marcus stood, confident but approachable in his posture. He thanked the board for the opportunity to speak and shared a bit about his background, how he had grown up in a small town, worked his way through college, and built a career in real estate. He spoke of his desire to invest in neighborhoods like Willow Creek, not just for financial gain, but to help create vibrant, inclusive communities. "I believe in the power of neighborhoods," he said, his voice steady. "I want to be a good neighbor, to contribute, and to make this a place where everyone feels welcome." The room was silent for a moment. Then a smattering of applause broke out, growing louder as more residents joined in. Even some of Karen's staunchest supporters found themselves nodding in approval. Karen, however, was not so easily swayed. She cleared her throat, determined to reassert her authority. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I trust you'll familiarize yourself with our bylaws and ensure that your property remains in compliance. We take pride in maintaining high standards here." Marcus smiled, undeterred. "Absolutely, Ms. Whitmore. In fact, I've already read through the bylaws, and I'd be happy to volunteer for the landscaping committee. I have some suggestions for the community garden's enhancement." The offer caught Karen off guard, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. The board members exchanged glances, impressed by Marcus's initiative. "Mr. That's wonderful, Marcus," Patel said. "We could use some new concepts." The meeting continued, but the mood had shifted. Marcus's willingness to engage, to listen, and to contribute had won over many of the residents. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to him to say hello, tell stories, and give him tips on how to get around Willow Creek's peculiarities. Karen watched from a distance, her earlier certainty replaced by a nagging sense of doubt. She came to the conclusion that she had misjudged Marcus, not only as a homeowner, but also as a person. She made a more subdued approach to Marcus as the crowd dispersed. She smiled tentatively and said, "I hope you'll forgive my enthusiasm. I just want the best for the neighborhood," she said. Marcus nodded, extending a hand. "I understand, Ms. Whitmore. We all want the same thing." The handshake marked a turning point, not just for Karen and Marcus, but for the entire community. The eviction notices story became a lesson in humility, respect, and the value of allowing people to express themselves fully. The mood in Willow Creek Estates began to shift in subtle and significant ways in the weeks that followed the HOA meeting. Once a source of whispered speculation, Marcus's presence evolved into a catalyst for new connections and a rekindled sense of community. He poured himself into the landscaping committee's work, organizing weekend cleanups and inviting both old and new neighbors to assist with flower planting and hedge trimming in the shared spaces. His easygoing nature and willingness to lend a hand won over even the most skeptical residents, and soon the community garden was thriving with fresh vegetables and bright blooms. Children played together on the green, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood, while parents chatted over coffee and shared stories about their lives. Marcus made a point of attending every HOA meeting, not just as a formality, but as an opportunity to listen and contribute. He offered thoughtful suggestions, such as starting a neighborhood watch program or increasing the safety of playgrounds, and he always made sure to acknowledge the contributions of others. The board, once dominated by Karen's voice, became more collaborative, with members feeling empowered to speak up and share their perspectives. Karen, on the other hand, was in uncharted territory. She had always prided herself on her leadership, but now she saw that her approach had sometimes stifled the very sense of community she claimed to protect. Watching Marcus interact with the neighbors, she realized how much she had missed by keeping people at arm's length and insisting on doing things her way. At first, she struggled with feelings of resentment and embarrassment, but over time, those feelings gave way to curiosity and, eventually, admiration. She started working on the landscaping committee's weekend projects, initially just to supervise, but soon she was digging in the dirt with everyone else, having a good time and telling stories. She discovered that Marcus had a knack for bringing people together, for finding common ground even when opinions differed. She also saw how her own reputation had changed. Neighbors who had previously avoided her were now welcoming, and she was invited to parties that she had previously dismissed as frivolous. One Saturday, as the committee worked together to install a new bench in the community garden, Karen found herself sitting next to Marcus, wiping sweat from her brow. "You know," she said, her tone thoughtful, "I never imagined I'd see the day when this neighborhood felt so alive. I suppose I owe you an apology for how I treated you at first." Marcus smiled, his eyes kind. "I'm grateful, Karen, but you don't owe me anything. Everybody makes mistakes. What matters is what we do next." Karen gave a nod as she felt a weight drop from her shoulders. "I suppose I was concerned about losing control. But I see now that real leadership is about listening and letting others shine." Marcus nodded in agreement. "It comes down to trust. And I trust that we can make this place even better together." The conversation marked a turning point for Karen, who began to detach herself from her position as the sole authority and focus instead on mentoring new board members and supporting community projects. Collaboration brought her joy and pride in seeing others lead. As summer turned to fall, Willow Creek Estates blossomed into a true community. The annual block party, once a state affair, became a vibrant celebration of diversity and friendship, with food from every culture, music, and games for all ages. Marcus was a neighbor and a friend, not an outsider or a newcomer, and he was at the center of everything. The story of the eviction notice faded into memory, replaced by stories of shared triumphs and laughter. Even the local newspaper took notice, running a feature on the neighborhood's transformation and highlighting Marcus's role in bringing people together. Karen, once known for her strictness, was now celebrated for her willingness to change and grow. She and Marcus became unlikely friends, their partnership a testament to the power of humility, forgiveness, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to belong. As the seasons changed and the years passed, the transformation of Willow Creek Estates became a model for other neighborhoods in the city. What had begun as a tense confrontation on a sunny porch had blossomed into a story of growth, understanding, and genuine community. Marcus's leadership and kindness continued to ripple outward, inspiring others to step up and take ownership of their shared spaces. He helped launch a scholarship fund for local students, organized food drives during the holidays, and worked with the city council to improve public safety and green spaces. The community's annual events grew in size and spirit, attracting families from nearby communities who wanted to experience Willow Creek's warmth and camaraderie. Karen, once the face of rigid authority, found new purpose as a mentor and advocate for inclusive leadership. She spoke at local workshops about her journey, candidly sharing her mistakes and the lessons she'd learned about humility, listening, and the importance of welcoming change. She and Marcus frequently made appearances at these events together, and their friendship serves as a real illustration of how bridges can be built where walls once stood. The HOA board, once a source of anxiety for many residents, became a hub of creativity and collaboration. Longtime residents felt empowered to speak up because new members brought new ideas. The community garden expanded, with neighbors of all ages working side by side to plant harvest and celebrate the fruits of their labor. The playground was renovated, and a mural painted by local artists now adorned the community center, depicting scenes of unity, laughter, and hope. Marcus's home, once the subject of suspicion, became a gathering place for neighborhood meetings, potlucks, and late-night conversations on the porch. He never forgot the day Karen tried to give him an eviction notice, but instead of remembering it with resentment, he remembered it with appreciation for the journey it had led him on. He often told new residents, "This is a place where everyone belongs, no matter where you come from or what you look like. We're neighbors first, and that's what matters most." Karen, too, found joy in a new chapter of her life. She took up gardening, started a book club, and even learned to bake bread, sharing loaves with friends and newcomers alike. She looked back on her early days as HOA president with a mix of amusement and humility, grateful for the second chance to be part of something bigger than herself. The story of Willow Creek Estate spread beyond the city, featured in magazines and community leadership seminars, as an example of what could happen when people chose empathy over ego and collaboration over control. The neighborhood's children grew up surrounded by examples of kindness, resilience, and a belief that change was not something to fear, but to embrace. On the 5th anniversary of Marcus's move to Willow Creek, the neighborhood threw a surprise celebration in his honor. The community center was filled with laughter, music, and the delicious smells of home-cooked food. Karen gave a heartfelt speech, recalling the day she tried to evict Marcus and the lessons she'd learned since. "I thought I was protecting this neighborhood," she said, her voice steady, "but it turns out I was just protecting my own fears. Marcus showed me and all of us that real community is about opening doors, not closing them." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus, moved by the outpouring of love, thanked everyone for making Willow Creek a true home. "We did this together," he said, "and together we'll keep building a place where everyone is welcome." Neighbors gathered on porches and lawns to talk about their stories and hopes for the future as the sun set over Willow Creek Estates. A neighborhood where differences were celebrated, mistakes became opportunities for growth, and every person, regardless of their background, could find a place to belong had emerged from that initial confrontation's legacy. And as Marcus and Karen sat side by side, watching children play and friends laugh, they knew that the real victory was not in proving someone wrong, but in helping everyone find a way to be right, together,